How to knit stockinette stitch for beginners. Hi everyone, Norman here. Stockinette stitch is a simple 2-row repeat. On the right side you knit across all stitches and on the wrong side you purl across all stitches. Let's show you the ins and outs of knitting stockinette stitch. We'll start knitting stockinette stitch with a simple long tail cast on. So I wrap my yarn here around my pinky finger, bring it across the back of my hand, and then I wrap it around my thumb and secure the tail between ring and index finger. The tail you leave here on this side should be at least 4 times as long as your project will be wide. And then I typically prefer to cast on using 2 knitting needles for a slightly stretchier edge. And then we simply do the long tail cast on. If this is a little bit too fast for you, you can always slow down this video by clicking on the settings button and play it at 50% or 25% of the speed. And you will also find links to slow motion videos of how I knit the long tail cast on and later on all the various stitches here on this YouTube channel as well. For a start, I'm going to cast on 10 stitches here for our little swatch. For the stockinette stitch, you can cast on an even number or an odd number of stitches, it doesn't matter. Now that we cast on our 10 stitches, you can remove one knitting needle and turn things around. I am knitting with double pointed knitting needles here, but you can knit stockinette stitch with whatever knitting needles you prefer. These are just easier to handle. Now we will start knitting stockinette stitch on the wrong side. That's because the long tail cast on already creates the first row of knit stitches in the same breath. So we will start on the wrong side by purling across all stitches. So we are going to purl across each and every single stitch here in this row with 10 stitches. If I'm going too fast, consider pressing on the settings button and you can play this video at 50 or even 25% of the speed I am knitting with. Then we turn around and the next row will be our first right side row. And on the right side we knit across all stitches. So simply knit the standard knit stitch through each and every stitch. It's as simple as that. The stockinette stitch is, as I said in the beginning, a 2-row repeat. So after 2 rows you can already see the pattern emerge. From here turn around and then you simply purl across this 3rd row. This here will be your wrong side and the other side, the knit side, is typically referred to as the right side. Turn around and here knit across this next row as well. And if you repeat these 2 rows over and over again, this will be the result. One note here, this is the wrong side with these little bumps here. It's often called reverse stockinette stitch. It's the exact same pattern, it just means you start on the wrong side and use the wrong side for your pattern, but the repeat will be the exact same. You always alternate 1 knit stitch row with 1 purl stitch row. Next, I want to talk about the most common problems and mistakes in stockinette stitch. First of all, if you drop a stitch, always turn your work over to the right side if you aren't already there, and then pick up the drop stitch with a crochet hook. And then you can simply ladder up. Simply pick the next strand and pull it through. See how I'm doing this? It's as simple as that. No need to unravel. You can simply ladder up and then here, as you slip the stitch back to the knitting needle, do it like that. with the leading leg, this leg here in front. And then you can simply continue knitting. In this case, I am on the wrong side. Now here's another very common mistake. So below, this is standard stockinette stitch. Each V stands for one row. This is our cast on row. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. That's how many stitches, rows we knitted. Up here, things look a little bit differently. You can see that we have some rows here where you don't get a full V. It's almost like half an X or so. These stitches are twisted. And that happens when you either twist your knit stitches or your purl stitches. Let's take a look. Whenever you purl a stitch, you need to enter from right to left. From right to left. And then you need to wrap the yarn around the needle counterclockwise. Counterclockwise. If you wrap the yarn around clockwise like so, the result will be twisted stitches. Let's take a look at this again. So we need to wrap around in this direction and not in this direction. Another issue would be if you enter here through the back leg, not here through the front, but through the front, and then wrap counterclockwise. This too would result in a twisted purl stitch. So always enter from right to left and wrap around counterclockwise. No matter if you're doing it here with the left hand or the right hand, it always needs to be counterclockwise. The same applies to the knit stitch. So always enter from left to right, and wrap around counterclockwise. Left to right, wrap around counterclockwise. If you enter through the back loop instead, so here this is the back loop, if you enter through the back loop instead and wrap around counterclockwise, the result will be I split the yarn here, the result will be a twisted stitch. And the same applies to if you enter from left to right, but now you wrap around clockwise, then the result will also be a twisted stitch. That's not what you want. Always enter from left to right and wrap around counterclockwise. Here is another very common mistake. So you probably saw me doing this in the last section. So your stockinette stitch looks right, so you have all the V's stacked upon each other, but there are always odd little rows, very noticeable here on the wrong side, that are so much looser than the others. See the difference here? There's this one loose row where there is a big welly between the two ridges. So what happened here? This issue happens when either your knit or your purl stitches are looser than the other. And a very simple way to prevent that is, especially when you're knitting flat, you can easily knit all purl rows with a needle that is one size smaller. So I'm using 4mm needles here, but for my purl rows, I'm going to knit them with 3mm needles. So if you have, I don't know, an interchangeable knitting needle set, you can simply attach a smaller sized tip to one end to achieve the very same effect. And now, here comes the genius thing. As you turn around, this frees your 4mm needle, and then you can knit across that row with the knit stitches here with the 4mm knitting needles. This needle here just acts as a stitch holder. It doesn't change your knitting anymore. And then as you finished this row, it frees your 3mm needle, and then you can purl across using the smaller needle. Now, ultimately, you should work on having a very similar tension with your knit stitches and your purl stitches, and the only way to achieve this is practice. But as a first start, this can be a great fix. Another very common issue is curling. So whenever you knit flat stockinette stitch, you can see that it's curling here on the side, but also the edges are curling in. No, I have a full tutorial on how to prevent curling over on my main channel. I link it to you up in here and how to prevent it. But here's the easiest way. By far the easiest way, especially when it comes to knitting, I don't know, a scarf or blankets, is adding a border of garter stitch. So the first 3 rows I just knitted across. So here, this bottom here is pure garter stitch, and only after these first 3, 4, could be 5 rows, I will start with the stockinette stitch. And here on the side I also keep an edge of 3 stitches in garter stitch. And it's fairly easy to knit that. Let's knit it together. So on the right side, you simply knit across. You don't need to pay attention. This part stays exactly the same. Just knit all stitches, and I'm quickly doing this here. Just knit all stitches here on the right side. And then you turn around, and here on the wrong side, instead of purling the first 3 stitches, you knit the first 3 stitches, knit the first 3 stitches, and then switch to purling. But pay attention, because you need to stop purling 3 stitches before the end. If you're worried that you miss it, place a stitch marker, always very helpful. And then here, these last 3 stitches, knit them as well. And if you do this in every row, the result will be this kind of garter stitch selvage, which really helps prevent curling in on the sides, especially after blocking. Then things will be super nice and neat. But if we take a closer look at this swatch, there is another issue with stockinette stitch you might have observed. So earlier I was talking about the beautiful little V's stockinette stitch creates. So take a look at this swatch here. So we have one V here, another V here, another V. So it's a C full of V's. But here, this doesn't really look like V's. It's more like one continuous column with, well, slanting little dashes here. So how and why does this happen? The reason is twist. So if you compare these 2 yarns, you can see that this one here is highly twisted. Just compare the slant of these lines. So here I have so many little twists, and here it's a lot less. So whenever you have a yarn with such a high twist, your stockinette stitch will always look like this. There's literally nothing you can do to prevent this other than switching yarns, and I just urge you to accept it because it looks different, but it's just as pretty. There is another selvage stitch I want to show you in this context, and it's called the slip stitch selvage, and it creates a very neat edge. So I'm here in my first right side row, and instead of knitting that first stitch, I slip it point to point or purlwise, and the yarn stays in back, and I don't knit that stitch. And then I just continue knitting across the row as normal. So you just slip the first stitch, and then you turn around. And here on the wrong side, on the purl side, you slip the very first stitch without knitting as well. But this time you do it with yarn held in front. And again, you do it purlwise or point to point. And then you knit across. So it's very easy and simple to remember. Just slip the first stitch of every row purlwise. And keep the working yarn the way it should be for the full row. So here I'm on the knit side, the yarn needs to be in the back, so I slip purlwise with yarn held in back. And on the purl side, the yarn always needs to be in front, so I slip purlwise as well, but this time with yarn held in front. So turn around here again, slip purlwise, but with yarn held in front, and then continue knitting. And if you do this in every row, this will be the result of very nice edge. Just please don't have the illusion that this will prevent curling. Maybe a tiny little bit, but otherwise please stick to a garter stitch selvage. Ribbing could also be a choice. If you want to knit stockinette stitch in the round, it couldn't be easier because you simply need to knit across all rounds and stitches. So here's my beginning of the round marker. I'm starting a new round, but it's knit stitches all over. So instead of switching between the two rounds or stitches, you knit across all rounds. In fact, if you would switch, the result would be garter stitch. So for stockinette stitch, simply knit across all rounds. However, if your pattern calls for reverse stockinette stitch in the round, this means you have to purl across all stitches in rounds. So in flat knitting, reverse stockinette stitch basically just means we use the wrong side. But when you knit in the round, you actually have to purl across all stitches and change the pattern slightly. So that is a difference I do feel is worth noting. That being said, if it's the full tube that is in reverse stockinette stitch, you can simply stick to the plain stockinette stitch pattern and then later on reverse things as well. That's possible as well. But if it's just a small section like this one here, if it's just a small section, then of course you would have to switch to purling. Anyway, that's how to knit stockinette stitch. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your questions, and of course, don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day!